because she was, for all intents and purposes, she could have been anybody that we know. She got into a car accident. She had severe back injuries. Those back injuries led to opioid painkillers. Opioid painkillers led to heroin and led to like the disintegration of her family. I mean, it was, and it you know, in talking to her and looking at the way her life, I'm going to say regressed, but the way it happened, it was almost in an instant, right? I mean, you're talking in less than a year.
Welcome to another edition of Recovery Happens. I'm Patrick Patterson with BW Rock. This month we celebrate 1 year of Recovery Happens. That's 1 year of telling people stories, 1 year of reducing the stigma of addiction, and 1 year of offering hope to encourage recovery. Where we've reached an audience of over 250,000 people, we want to thank each and every one of you. This week we're going to be sitting down with one of the important dignitaries in the community and an important supporter of recovery from addiction, Dan Damman.
My name is Dan Damman. I am an attorney at Winston & Damman. I've been a litigator for about 17 years. Former mayor of Marysville. I served that role for about 6 years. I was on council for 2 years before that. And I have recently announced my candidacy for judge of the 31st Circuit Court here in St. Clair County. Well, I think that the first thing we have to maybe nail down or drill down on a little bit is that addiction is something that is very real. It affects just under 20 million people in our country. In 2017, the statistic was, I believe, about 19.1 million people were affected by some type of addiction. And you can trace that back and say, well, you know, the desire to start using drugs or the desire to start using alcohol was a personal choice. And I think that we can all wrap our minds around that. But there are a lot of people out there that made that personal decision to start, but that personal decision to stop has been corrupted by their inability to do so. Because I think that there is evidence to support the fact that you're talking about chemical dependencies and dependencies that are beyond somebody just choosing to do something or to not do something. So recovery is important because if we're in a situation where we have somebody who wants to make a life change and we have somebody who has the desire to step out and live a better life than what they're living, but they're addicted to something, we have to offer them the hope and the help to do that. So, you know, I'm a man of faith. I think that that's something that you probably know about me. And I think with that comes our obligation to help one another. And that help can come in many forms. It can be as simple as holding somebody accountable that needs to be held accountable. It can be a person to reach out to when a person who is in recovery is kind of walking that fine line along relapse. One thing we can't do is we can't give up on those that haven't given up on themselves, and we can't give up on those that know that they have the potential. I think that's our obligation. I think societies can be measured by how they treat their most vulnerable. How do they treat the elderly? How do they treat the sick and the poor? And I think addiction falls into that. Now, I'm not going to say that, you know, if somebody commits a crime because they're an addict that they shouldn't be punished. I'm certainly not going there. But part of what happens next should be the goal to pull them out of where they are. So the how is we provide services. The how is we provide mental health counseling. The how is that we provide what they as an individual need. Now they've got to want it. That individual has to want to reach out and take that olive branch that is being offered to them to right that ship. But if they do, then we've got to be there to support them as a society. And I think that it comes in many forms. And I'm not an expert in recovery, but my suspicion would be what might work for one person might be a little different for another as compared to another. So I think we have to approach recovery on an ad hoc basis, and we take a look at the individual. But I think if we miss the mental health component of that, I think we're missing the ship. at the end of the day, that's your question is, how do we take the system of recovery that we have right now and how do we make it better? One thing I want to hit on that you said is, I agree. I agree to a very large extent that relationships can change an atmosphere, all right? And I can talk from personal experience, not as it relates to addiction, but as it relates to my service in the city of Marysville. I often say that in St. Clair County, the river has always flowed south, the grass has always been green, and the sky has always been blue. But that didn't change from 20 years ago to today. What changed is the people. And when the people change, relationships change. And when you start to build relationships, you can start to make progress. So, there is, and I don't want to say people's hearts aren't in the right place, because I think they are. I think people want to see recovery. But perspective is a very important function of success. So when you have a bureaucratic approach to something, often it is, we're just going to throw money at it and somehow that's going to make it better. But until you get down into the trenches with the people who are on the front lines like yourself and have the discussion to say, okay, we can throw $17 million or $17 billion or $17 trillion at this, but until we find out what actually makes the impact, I don't know that those statistics change. But think about this for a moment. In 2017, 4% of adolescents aged 12 to 17 or 18 suffered from some type of an addiction, okay? Now, 4% doesn't seem like a lot until you start to break it down. If you break down 4%, that means 4 out of 100. It's about 992,000 kids in our country suffer from some type of an addiction. 4 in 100, or 1 in 25. And if you think about the average high school sized classroom, there's about 25 kids in there. So at any given day, you can go throughout a high school, look in those doors, and from a statistics perspective, 1 in 25. Now that number jumps from 4% to more than 14% when they hit the age of 18 to 25. So what's happening? That number from a realistic standpoint jumps from 992,000 to 5.1 million. And then when they get over that age, now you're into, the $19.7 million or 19.7 million people range. So one thing that you can easily track is the trend of addiction as people progress in age or as they get older. So one thing that we, may wish to do as a society is start to confront addiction at the lowest levels, educate kids about addiction, what it looks like, what it feels like, how to get out of it. We do a lot with suicide prevention, right? We do a lot with bullying. Absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary. And I don't make the suggestion, I would say, that we stop doing that, but I think we add to this bag of tricks that we've got to try to create the next generation better than it's ever been. We add to that the statistics about addiction and how to get help. But we get down in, if we really want to make a difference, we take the money and we apply it where it's going to have the most impact. And the people that are allocating the funds generally are not necessarily going to know unless they get down into the trenches and have the face-to-face contact with people who are out there every single day, meeting the addicts and trying to intervene in that person's life to try to help them be a better person. And I think that's what we have to do. And that is exactly what you said. That's about relationships. But it's not just relationships with Pat and the addict that you're trying to help. It's relationships with Pat and the representatives in Lansing who control some of the purse strings, or at the federal level, right? So we build relationships from the ground up. I had a case where I represented a mother in a possession of heroin case a few years back. And it really bothered me to my core because she was, for all intents and purposes, she could have been anybody that we know. She got into a car accident. She had severe back injuries. Those back injuries led to opioid painkillers. Opioid painkillers led to heroin and led to like the disintegration of her family. I mean, it was, and it you know, in talking to her and looking at the way her life, I'm going to say regressed, but the way it happened, it was almost in an instant, right? I mean, you're talking in less than a year. She goes from a person who has everything to a person who has to meet me and help me walk her through the criminal justice system because of an addiction that she developed. So the point to that is you're spot on. Addiction doesn't know age, as we just talked about. It doesn't know race. It doesn't know religion. Addiction doesn't know when you cross the border from Port Huron to Marysville to St. Clair or out to K-Pac or into Macomb County or Wayne or into Ohio. It doesn't know any of that. What addiction knows is that it's able to wrap its claws around somebody and really drag them down until such time that somebody extends that lifeline to pull them back out of it.
Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Recovery Happens. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please give us a call at 888-68-BW-ROC. We'd like to thank our sponsor, the Port Huron Yeti Roller Hockey.